Hey everyone, Jeff here. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. First, I want to thank you guys for joining me. I know this is a little bit different time. This is actually episode 24, believe it or not. But the show is usually at 7:30 on Thursday nights. Trying a little something different, just to see if we can get some other folks from across the world who are different time zones to join us live. So 12:30 today. Thanks for joining us. If you are a new tuning in viewer, then thank you for joining. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel or head over to therevitkid.com and subscribe to my newsletter so you get updates for future episodes. If you have no idea what you're tuning into here, BIM After Dark Live is a show that I started here on YouTube about 24 weeks ago, so pretty much at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's really just a weekly show where it's either myself or I bring in guests like today, and we chat about all things Revit, BIM, and adjacent software. So pretty fun. The live format is extremely fun because it can be interactive. So I urge you guys to chat. We'll be talking about what we're talking about today. And if you want to have some questions, feel free to hit the chat. I will be watching it the entire time. Another thing to mention is every episode I always get one or two emails asking about some of the free resources I mentioned. So if you're interested, I do have some free resources. If you go to free.bim-after-dark.com, I've got some desktop cheat sheets for like Dynamo and family creation, and some small ebooks that I did about designing with Revit and so on. So definitely check that out. That's free.bim-after-dark.com. And as usual, all of the links that we mentioned during this episode will be in the post description below here on YouTube or on the blog, which I usually publish tomorrow, and that's at the Revit Kit. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce my guest right away. We're going to jump right into it. And so Paul Aubin is here. So Paul, welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know who Paul is, you probably are just getting into Revit, but that's okay. I'm going to give Paul an ability to introduce himself. Paul and I go back quite a while now, both online and in-person conferences, etc. But Paul actually has a new book out. And so Paul and I were chit-chatting about some possible new topics to have him come on, and the fact that his new book came out. And actually, some of the discussions that we had in our last episode, even, I noticed. Last week I had Philip Chan on, and we were talking about Revit family creation, and he did a really cool poll in the beginning. If you didn't see that, check it out. And actually, all the previous episodes you can see at live.bimafterdark.com. But we did a little poll in the beginning, and I was a little bit surprised to see the years of experience of some of the viewers. And, as someone who's been using Revit for 10 plus years, and I know, Paul, you've been using Revit for 10 plus years, it can be extremely easy for us to forget what it was like 10 years ago and forget that there are people still learning software from the beginning. And so it was actually like perfect timing where Paul reached out. He was mentioning his new book, which is Revit Essentials for Architecture. Is that what it is? Yeah,
that's one.
I got it. So I'll let Paul talk a little bit about it, but I thought this was kind of cool because I think it's easy for those of you who maybe are experienced Revit users and thinking I don't need to watch a back to basics episode. I think it's really interesting, even if it's just the humbleness of remembering what it was like in the beginning, but also maybe there's something that you learned way back when that has changed as well, because Revit has changed quite a bit, or also maybe some way that you learned something that maybe there's a better way to do it that you were just never taught. And so to me, it's always fun to go back to these basics and see different ways and different ways that people approach things. So with that, Paul, if you want to maybe do a quick intro to yourself for those that don't know you, and then we can start talking about the new book a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So the Revit Kid, is that your son?
Yes. He's actually napping in the other room right now.
You're getting a little too old for that title, I'm afraid.
Well, it's all relative, right, Paul? I mean,
it is all relative.
I mean, I'm getting older, but you're also getting older too, right?
Yeah. If you're measuring it against me, then you'll always be the Revit Kid.
There we go.
So, yeah. Well, thanks, Jeff, for having me on again. This is always great fun, and I think this is our third time now, but each time has been a little bit different. The first time we teamed up with Marcelo, and then we did the little team session with my Dynamo user group, and now here I am solo. So I'm, going on. What do they call it when the band, the lead singer, I'm leaving the band and going solo now. So. Yeah, my name is Paul Aubin, and I've been in the architectural industry for quite some time now. I did start my career in architecture and doing architectural things, but it didn't take long before I realized I was kind of interested in the tech side of things. Of course, we're talking AutoCAD and AutoCAD related products back then. I actually went into Revit kicking and screaming a little bit. So if some of you are, still resistant, don't feel bad. It happens to all of us at some point. But obviously, those are days are long past. Now Revit is clearly my tool of choice. And yeah, I did finally get around to updating the book. This is an update to a book that was last updated 5 years ago. So it's been a long time.
That's a long time in Revit years, man.
Yeah, it sure is. And I was actually surprised at how much of it still held up, though, because a lot of the basics so the book it starts with nothing. It assumes you know nothing. Except architecture. I don't teach architecture in the book. So it assumes you have some sort of an architectural background or you're interested in the building industry, but you want to use Revit as a tool to help you do that. So we build 2 projects simultaneously. It's all tutorial, 100% step-by-step. One is a small residential project. The other is a commercial project. And they're kind of running concurrently. So they start from nothing in the early chapters and then get to about early CDs by the end of the book. So if you follow along every page, you build these 2 projects in completion. Otherwise, you can jump in anywhere you want because I provide files at each chapter. It's the basics. What I was starting to say was surprising that some of the stuff hasn't really changed because the real basic fundamental skills in Revit haven't changed tremendously over the years. What we've seen is new features get introduced, more focus on the cloud, enhancements, speed improvements, a lot of incremental changes, totally new features like, path of travel, for example, is a recent new feature, but honestly, not really something that I would consider a Revit essential. You know what I mean? So you have to make some really tough calls when you're writing a book like this. And when you call it Revit Essentials, and I deal with this in my video training too, because that my primary course on LinkedIn Learning is Revit Essentials for Architecture. So I decided to make the book kind of similar title, even though it is completely different data sets. It's the same basic topics, but they're different data sets. So it's not just the video version of the book or the book version of the video. They are 2 totally different TOCs, but tables of contents, but they are similar content, walls and basics and, building projects and making sheets and all that stuff. But, it's, when you're trying to decide, my best producer, the best piece of advice I got from a producer years ago was, I was struggling. Should I include that? It's this new feature. It's important. He would just look me in the eye and he'd say, but is it essential? And he just kept asking me that as we were working together in the booth. And after a while, it sunk in and I was like, so I get it. So I have to do this really tough job of editing myself and saying, okay, is it essential? Because you can't cover everything. Right. And the book is already a behemoth at 800 pages. I mean, it's like, 1.5 inches thick. Mm-hmm. So you can't cover everything. So what do you leave out? So my goal with that book is to try and get somebody a really good foundation where they're going to get up and running in Revit well. And if they already know Revit, then there's certainly tips along the way. Because, I don't exactly shy away from diving deep into the details either. So they're not trivial tutorials. In fact, my tech editor groaned in several places where she was like, oh my God, will this chapter ever end? And I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry.
But that's a good point, because I will say one thing, having review copies of most of your books back there in the office, as well as the PDF you sent me here. I like the one thing I've noticed about the way your books are structured and laid out is, even if it's a topic like Essentials, where I would consider myself to not necessarily need, right, just because of my level of experience, it reads where you could either follow it in order, in sequence, and get there, or it's kind of like it reminds me of like a code book almost, where I know that I can use a 2x12 here, but I end up going to the chapter, fiddling to it, and then digging in through some of the why and this and that, and that's where I think it can come into play. And what comes to mind for me was your Navisworks book. I don't remember when that was. When the heck did you do that one?
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
2014? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I only knew a little bit of Navisworks. I was basically doing Essentials, and
right.
And it was the same thing where, like, I would tinker around with the program and get to what I needed to, but then I was able to just go to the piece in the book that I wanted. And because you dug in,
thank God
in the Paul Aubin way,
Yeah, right.
but I think that's pretty cool because even for like code books are one thing where like if you're doing the same type of architecture all the time, odds are you're probably going to know most of the codes for what you're doing. But the
Yeah.
reality is, having those as reference to go back to dig into those details is always extremely valuable. And that's where even flipping through this one, I got the same sense that you can pick it up in any part and like you're exactly like path of travel. That's something where maybe it's a new feature or something that's changed. You can just go to that chapter in the book, dig in and see what it is. So
Yeah, and
that's
see what
pretty cool. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I hope for, and hopefully the index is a good tool to direct people to that. Of course, if you get the Kindle version, then there's a search function, which makes it a little easier than a paper-based one. But they both have their utility. So it is available in paperback and in Kindle. I'm toying with a broader EPUB strategy. I haven't decided yet because it's I don't know how to say this delicately. It's kind of a pain in the neck to make an EPUB, at least in my experience. I'm not an expert at it. So it was a lot easier to make a Kindle. Amazon really has the lock on that. They've made it super easy to convert your manuscript into their format. And then I saw some stat somewhere that 80-something% of ebooks are Kindle anyway. And I went, well, duh, then I guess I'll just do that,
Right,
so,
right.
but I'm happy to, if somebody is like, oh no, absolutely, we want an EPUB version, I'm happy to take that feedback because it's not off the table. So
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. So I know you've prepared some content that sort of goes on with the book.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, though, also is Paul has been kind enough to offer a free copy to someone viewing this live here. And so in order to encourage some of this interaction, because, again, you guys that are here live, you can chat. I'll be checking the chat the entire time. We want you to ask questions. And at the end of this, I'm just going to pick questions as they go along, ones that seem relevant and go along with Paul's content. So ask away in the chat, and at the end, I'm going to ask Paul to tell me what his favorite question was, and then you will get a free book. So make sure you ask questions along the way. And I believe Paul, actually, someone in the chat actually said it's strange hearing your voice and not seeing the Revit UI. And Paul and I were just talking about this because when he shares his screen, you'll see by default it doesn't share the face, and I was saying how it's kind of strange. If you go for too long with it. But then I'm thinking about it, and like my training content and your training content, you're not always seeing faces the whole time. So people may be used to us for hours at a time just staring at Revit and hearing our voices. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are cameras I haven't recorded in a booth in a while since we've all been quarantined. But they do have cameras in the booths, and of course now we're recording from home, so it is a possibility. I don't know. We haven't really talked about it. I mean, maybe we'll start thinking about adding the little camera in the corner. Who knows? So.
Yeah. I guess it depends on how into the content you are while you're recording it too. Because
it's one more thing I've got to remember to do then, because if you find your eyes roaming around in all these weird places, it might look weird to people. So it can actually backfire. So
and finding the moment to look up so you're not just like this the whole time.
Like the one thing I've had to train myself to do in recording is the excessive zooming. Now everybody on the call knows what I'm talking about.
Panning and zooming.
Nobody can help themselves. They're just panning and zooming the whole time they're working in Revit. And if you're trying to watch a video and somebody's doing that, after a while, it starts making you dizzy. So I try really hard to be more deliberate about my pans and zooms. I can't say I'm always successful, but I'm always trying to be mindful of that. So
I noticed it even this morning. I was on a Teams call. I was sharing my screen, and we weren't even talking about the screen, and I'm just panning and zoom. It's like a tick. Like you pan, zoom, and orbit if you're in 3D. And it's even worse now because Revit, if you don't change the settings, it removes the lines and paints the lines. You know what I mean? The optimization, and like that makes it even worse to people who are watching. It's like, what is happening to your screen? All right, so Paul's going to share a screen. He's going to jump into some content, along the lines of the book, and I'll let him take it away. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So guys, definitely feel if you have the urge to ask a question. Any question, really, ask it, and I won't necessarily interrupt Paul if it's extremely unrelated, but ask the question in the chat, and that's the whole point of this live thing is we want to get interaction going. So with that,
so
Paul,
Jeff, did I do that right? Are you seeing both Revit and me?
Yes, you're in the little corner there. I see Revit, and the text looks pretty good. For going from a really wide screen to a 2K screen to YouTube.
I gave up double monitors
Mm.
about a year and a half ago and got one of those really wide curved screens instead, which I love, but it does make it a little challenging to record. So
Yes, yeah. Even so, I have a 2K monitor and then the 1080 on the laptop. That's my two screens, and
yeah,
even just the difference between the two resolution wise can be a pain in the butt. So I can imagine an ultra
it
wide
can be.
can be a little
Yeah,
bit of a pain. All right, so we
yeah.
can see everything. So take it away, man.
All right, fantastic. So I'm not going to do something from every chapter, but just to give you a quick overview of the TOC, the first section is really just the bare bones introductory stuff. So like if you've been using Revit for a while, you could safely skip the first few chapters. It's kind of like a quick start overview, user interface. And this particular data set is the one where in the chapter where we just kind of learn a little bit about zooming and panning and working in multiple views and stuff like that. But I thought there was one thing I wanted to show you that I thought would be fun because I'm thinking again of the comments from my technical editor, and that's probably not a great shot. Let's do this one instead. Yeah, there we go. So that's that shot we were looking at on that sheet right there. And my tech editor was giving me a hard time because I was showing this one in with the steering wheel, and she's like, the steering wheel, does anybody even use that? And I was like, oh, I use the steering wheel all the time. I love this. I mean, it's not very useful in orthographic views or like plans or elevations or sections, unless of course you're working on your laptop on a touch screen or with a touchpad and no mouse, which I know there are still people out there that don't have a mouse for their laptop. It's kind of shocking for me, but
that's a requirement when you take my class at the university I teach at. Is I tell them if you come here without a mouse, then you might.
Yeah, you got to have a mouse. But there is an orbit function and a pan function and a zoom function that would take the place of the wheel on your mouse if you didn't. And again, laptop's the only time I can think of when you were doing that. And of course, I'm in perspective here, and it is cropped, so you can see that it would go outside the view if I'm panning or orbiting or whatever. But what I really love about this tool is, first of all, I'm going to kind of mess things up. I love this rewind feature because it remembers everything that you've been doing in the view, zoom wise. And it, especially people coming from AutoCAD, because they're used to being able to undo zooms and pans. Zooms and pans kind of record as regular commands in AutoCAD, but they don't in Revit. The only time undoing will change the screen in Revit is if it kind of has to, because something fundamental has changed, right? But generally speaking, if I did Control Z right now, nothing would happen because I haven't done anything to the model, right? So if in the course of undoing it had to also change the view, then it would. But otherwise, this is your best bet to kind of, and not only does it allow you to rewind back, but forward, right? So it kind of, and I don't know how many of these it remembers. I've had strips that go across the whole screen, but it's kind of the current session. So I really love that. And then look is a little different than orbit because it's more like turning your head and kind of looking around. Now, a new feature in latest releases is, if I turn the crop here, right? The crop is on for this view. And a couple of releases ago, we had the feature to turn that off. Now, mine's grayed out right now. And if you've ever run into that, why can't you uncrop your perspective view? The reason is, throw it out to the chat. See if anybody can throw it in the chat there, Jeff. If anybody knows why I can't uncrop the view.
All right, so yeah, if you guys know why you can't uncrop a perspective view, throw it in the chat right now. They'll probably be about 4 seconds behind us, so we'll give them a second.
All right, we'll give them a second to do that. But when I do get an uncropped view, the look feature is even more useful because it's literally like you're standing still, and then you can kind of look around in the space in a more immersive sort of way. All right, did anybody pose an answer, Jeff?
Not yet, but a lot of people said they completely forgot about the rewind. So
see, there you go.
Look at that already.
We're off to a good start already. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and answer it so I can move on. Here's the sheet that I started in. If the view is already on a sheet, you can't uncrop it. And if you think about it, that sort of makes sense, right? Because how could you have an uncropped view on a sheet? Because it would go into infinity, right?
Especially a perspective view, right? It would,
exactly.
Right.
Like where would it end? How would it know where the edge of the sheet is? So as soon as you put a view on a sheet, it prevents you from uncropping it. But I just made a duplicate of it right here. And now I have the feature to uncrop it. And so, if I kind of zoom in here and then go back to the steering wheel and use this look around, it's a little bit more like maybe if I get myself really in that space, right? Now it's a little bit more immersive, right? You see, because you can kind of spin around and, kind of look around in that space. Mm-hmm. So the look is a little different than Orbit, because Orbit kind of, it's by some seemingly arbitrary center point. Now you can use it, the pivot, to change where it is. So this center, it doesn't call it a pivot, but the center option allows you to recenter. Like let's say I want to center it on this little ottoman right here, or whatever that is. And now I'm orbiting around that point. So if you want a little more control, you definitely can get it. But the last thing I want to show you about the steering wheel is all the really cool hidden features on this little mini hidden menu here, right? And, you've got things like, I'm not going to give Revit a pass on this, but because it's still baffling to me that it's the only 3D program I know of that you can't just set the camera lens.
Oh my God, I know.
Right? Like, okay, I want to use a 35 millimeter camera lens. Where is that feature in Revit? It doesn't exist. But you can use this, and this is your zoom lens, right? And so that's doing that. The problem is, numerically, I have no idea what camera lens that is. So if you wanted to do like a really close camera match, it's kind of impossible to do. You're just going to get it close, and you're never really going to know for sure. Now, in a function like this, you have to press escape to get out of it, and then you're back to the steering wheel. And there's other cool things that are in here. Level the camera if you're using the walk tool, which I never demo because I'm really bad at it. But those of you that are first-person shooter gaming type folks, you should feel right at home there.
I was actually just gonna say, my favorite part about using the look tool and then the walk is that you can use the arrow keys as if you're in, in like an Enscape or a Lumion or a video game, and you can actually.
Well, here, let me try it. I won't be afraid. I'll wait. Is it WASD or?
I think it uses arrow.
Oh, I got to do walk first. Yeah, I got to do this. Yeah, there we go. So you take a little paper airplane here, and then you can either use the arrows. Mine's really slow, so that's where you could, speed it up with that option right here. Increase. Where did it go? There it is. Increase walk speed, and then it should be. And of course, now it put me out of there. I guess that's only for this walk.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. I always crash into a wall. See, but then that's where rewind, right, comes back in. So anyway, if you've never played with the steering wheel, and even if it's just for rewind, I think it's worth it. But for all the other little hidden functions that are under there, I think it's worth it. So just open up the sample project where you can't break anything, and just play around. And it's just another way to feel comfortable orbiting and moving around in a model. And great useful tool there. So definitely something that I actually use quite a bit. So I was chuckling when my tech editor complained about my using it. She was like, "Well, what about the view cube?" And I had the same attitude as her. I was like, "Well, doesn't everybody know the view cube already?" Like I was trying to show something that that people do. But I don't know, if you've never used the view cube, it's super cool too, right? Because you can just kind of click these little hotspots and orbit the and change the view to match any of those orientations. Now, the final thing is I'm still in perspective through all of this, right? So if I kind of, so you can actually, on the view cube, you can right click and change it to orthographic, and now it's an ortho view and vice versa, right? So you can kind of switch it back and forth between the two. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit later is making really dramatic perspectives. And a lot of times the way that I'll do that is, I guess I'm going to talk about it now since I'm already halfway through it, right? I'll kind of set up a view. Like if I want a dramatic perspective plan view like this one, I'll set it up the way I want first, right? Maybe orbit it slightly, do something like this. And then I will change it to a perspective, and it kind of just makes it a little bit more dramatic. And then maybe I'll go into the focal length that I was showing you, the increase, decrease focal length, and, see if I can make it more dramatic that way, and I find that a lot of times you can get a more, a more interesting perspective easier using some of those techniques than trying to draw the camera perfectly, right? But
And not to mention that also helps with the typical extreme over or 3-point perspective when you actually are using
yeah,
the camera. Knowing these tools and being able to use the steering wheel is actually really helpful to be able to try and get the shot you want without having your walls tilting up or down with that, because you don't have a tilt shift type of thing.
that's absolutely right. I don't have the right file open right now, but one other feature in here that helps with that is level camera. So if you've done this really dramatic shot looking up at the facade of your building, but it's really distorted because of the 3-point perspective, you can try leveling the camera, and that'll change it back to a 2-point perspective. And sometimes it's too much, but then you just tilt it, you kind of do a little back and forth, Yeah.
Awesome.
So, and then, of course, don't forget to make a duplicate every so often, because rewind is great, but maybe you've got a shot that's acceptable, but you want to keep trying. Just duplicate another view, give it another name, and then just keep playing until you find the one you want. And then that's the one that you name permanently and go from there.
So right? that rewind, actually, since we're talking about it, that's holding on the view. So if you went back into the other view, it's holding the rewind. I don't remember. I thought it disappears. Is it when you close the view? Or does
I think
it
I think every view has its own rewind,
okay,
if I'm not mistaken. So yeah. See, this rewind is just for this plan view. And then when I come back to here, it should still remember the rewind here. Yeah. Okay. See how long it's going through all of it.
And we wonder why Revit eats up so much RAM, right?
Yeah. Now, if you close Revit, that's going to get erased, right? So that's just in session. Yeah. So if you've got 20 tabs open and every one of them you've been zooming and panning, and they all have a rewind, definitely at some point you might want to, close your hidden windows or whatever. Now, I'm going to close this file, and a lot of people still to this day will do this, and they'll start Xing out each tab. And whenever I watch somebody do that, it's like, it's one of those things that just makes me, quiver a little bit, like, oh, stop doing that. Right. Like, just close the file. And you can do that from the file menu. But one of the things they introduced a couple of releases back, that's like my favorite keyboard shortcut, is Control W. So, it's a standard Windows shortcut, right? And of course I've saved the file. Do I want to save the file? I'm going to say no here. But the only time that's a bad thing is if you happen to kick out to something else. Like, let's say I was in Windows Explorer and I didn't realize I kicked out to that, and then I do Control W. Well, it's going to close that instead. Right. But most of the time, right? Like, that's just the fastest way. It doesn't matter if you have 20 tabs open. Just Control W and the whole project closes. And if it needs to save, it'll ask you.
Nice.
So, nice. Yeah. All right. Now, I know you guys talked about families last week, and it's on my list to watch. I apologize. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, but I'm sure it was wonderful because you guys are both wealths of knowledge when it comes to that. Here, I think the theme for a lot of the ones I picked is ones that got comments from my tech editor. So I don't mean to be picking on Desi. They were great comments, and so I guess
they're in the front of your mind, right? You get 100 good comments. That one comment, it's always going to be in your mind.
It wasn't even really good or bad, but it's just sort of the thing where sometimes you, like, I would talk to her about it, but then it didn't make it. Again, is it essential? It didn't make it into the book. I don't necessarily need to address that in the book, but since we're talking live, it gives me an opportunity to address it, just in case somebody's wondering, why on earth would he have done that? Like, why on earth would he have done a in-place family for this fireplace, right? Well, this is the layout exercise that you do in chapter 4, and it's literally step by step, draw this wall here, offset it here, copy it here, trim it here, going through all the modify tools. So for somebody who's completely brand new to Revit and wants to learn how to lay out a floor plan, this is your exercise. It's really simple, straightforward. And right now I've got it set to existing conditions, so you can see it's all gray. Well, what I was trying to show is just a really quick and easy way to show an existing condition like a fireplace. Now, I actually do have a family version of this too, because Revit LT doesn't support in place, and I didn't want that to be the deal breaker for somebody using Revit LT. So everything that I show in building this little fireplace, you could do in a straight up family. But the advantage is, and I'm just going to kind of delete this. And for those of you that don't realize how in place families work, I want to just expand family branch here. Scroll down. That's a generic model. And I chose generic model so that it would merge in nicely with the walls. But that's it right there. And I want you to watch what happens when I select this thing on screen and delete it. Okay. I said, let's select it on screen and delete it. There we go. Do you see how it disappeared from the family branch as well? Now, that won't happen if you just delete a door, right? Like it's not going to delete the family as well. Okay. But that's one of the things about in-place families. So in-place families by definition are intended to be one-off unique conditions that need the context in their surroundings in order for you to build them and for them to be meaningful. But theoretically, every single thing that you could build as an in-place family could be built in the regular family editor. And there are those who would argue that they always should be. But to do that, and this is a pretty simple example, but to do that, you would need to then recreate that context in the family editor, right? Now here, it's just a couple straight walls. That'd be pretty easy to do. But let's say there was a curve in this wall, or there was an angle over here, or there was something weird going on in the ceiling. It might become a lot more challenging to build that context in the family editor. And you could just decide this is a one-off, it's existing conditions, we're not doing anything to it. And that was sort of the rationale that I went after when I said, let's just make this an in-place family. Now, when you do that, it's model in place, you choose your category, and that puts you in a family editor. Is fireplace one word or two?
I think it's one. Fireplace. Okay. Yeah, I think it's one.
Yeah. Oops. Okay. Yeah, it's always bad to try and type and talk at the same time. Never goes well for me. All right. So, of course, now I'm in the family editor, but still with the project context in the background, and you can do all the standard stuff. Now, I'm not actually following the exact steps from the book here because I'm, just trying to do this quickly. But these I didn't in the book. We haven't trimmed this wall yet. Here I have, so I'm just going to borrow those locations because I know they're in the correct spot. And then these temporary dimensions, let's say that one's 1 foot off that wall, and let's say that it's 2 feet. I'm going to make it a little larger than it was in the book, but whatever it is, right? That's sort of the footprint of this thing. So that's just a rectangle. It would be super simple to create that in the traditional family editor. So I don't want anybody to walk away and say, Paul's out there telling everybody to make in-place families for, it's not what I'm saying, right?
BIM managers are cringing. No!
Yeah, BIM managers are all cringing right now and are like, oh my God. But this is an existing condition, I'm kind of doing that way, right? So, okay, here it is, right? Now it's a little taller than 4 feet. So I'm going to make that 9 feet because I think that was the floor to floor height there. And then, I was just trying to show a few basic things like I'm going to do this void a little bit faster than I did it in the book. So just kind of eyeballing the shape here, but in the book I did it a little more precisely. So if you want to follow the actual steps, that's not quite, I guess I could mirror this to get it at least symmetrical, right? And then trim that. And then this thing, sometimes it's easier to do it the way I'm doing it because then you can go midpoint to midpoint. I was thinking about this last night when I was going through what I was going to show today. And I was like, maybe I will show different stuff than I showed in the book because if they get the book, they can read it themselves. And also, Jeff, both of you and I forgot to mention that I am providing everything that I'm talking about here as how many pages is this? 67-page PDF. These are all little excerpts from the book. So, we were just talking about the Zoom tool in there, and now we're looking at, so if you want the actual exercise, literally step by step, what lines to draw, which ones to trim, where to split it, then merging it together with the join geometry, it's all here. And you can go through that first. So it's not, this isn't a bait and switch. You don't have to buy the book to do what I'm showing you today. But I hope that when you do go through this exercise, you'll say, I want to learn more. And then you will buy the book. But that's obviously your choice. But here is this little guy. And I think I forgot to make that a void. No, I did make it a void. Okay. So when I click anywhere to deselect, the way that Revit voids work is if they are in the same place as a solid, they automatically engage, right? And then I thought it'd be fun to just make one more extrusion just to make this a little different than the one that's in the book. And then this one here, I'm only going to make about 6 inches tall. So there'll be like a little hearth down there, like so. Now, when we finish that, this thing is, that separate generic model that's an in-place family. Now, I want you to watch right here again, and I want to show you why you never want to do an in-place family if you are intending to use this again somewhere. That's not the point, right? So if I do a copy and I just copy that next to itself, unlike any other family where you would just have two instances of the same family, look what I have here now. I now have fireplace 1. So literally every in-place family becomes a unique element. And so again, by definition, it is intended for these one-off special conditions. But we can just simply do a join geometry here. Well, I should probably change the phase because it came in as new construction. So let me make that existing. And then we can do a join geometry and join that to that and this to this. And then it's got that nice, continuous feel to it. Now, I thought about other ways to do this. Theoretically, you could make a really thick wall here, and then a custom void family that you use for the firebox. You obviously could do an actual family. So there is, like I said, in the book's data set, there is a version for LT. Where is it here? I guess it's incomplete. I have complete versions of everything. So when you start the chapter, these are the files you'll need for that chapter. But then if you want to compare your progress to what it should look like at the end, there's complete versions. But there's the fireplace as a standalone, loadable family for Revit LT, because obviously they don't have in-place families. So again, it was just sort of an attempt to, sometimes I'm trying to show 2 or 3 things at once. And so I was trying to show an appropriate use of an in-place at the same time as a really simple family editor exercise. I mean, that's obviously not super complicated. It's a couple of rectangles.
But the point with the 2 generic models is a good one to make. And that's just, if you're thinking about that beyond what you just mentioned, where it's in-place components should, in theory, be saved for, very specific occasions, right? Like you said, it's something that happens a one-off. And so often you see what you just did with the copy. And not only is it just, you run into issues where you're rebuilding things over and over again if it's, being used twice or 3 times, right? Because the other thing is if you edit fireplace 2 or 1, whatever that one is, it doesn't affect fireplace 1 anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So there's that issue, which I've seen lots of people run into, right? And the other thing is, this will also start, if you're worried about model performance, if you're one of those people.
Oh yeah, that'll kill it.
Like you're creating, an instance for every single one of these, and this is something that will affect model performance for sure.
Yeah, and then one last thing. Notice when I selected over here, there's nothing on the type selector. Mm-hmm. So if you go down this path, you can't even change your mind and just say, oh, I'll just swap it out with a real family. Mm-hmm. No, sorry, you got to delete it and then re-add the new family.
Yep, exactly.
One saving grace, if you went down this path and you want to recover, go to edit in place. You can select all of this. You can copy it to your clipboard, and then you can paste it into a real family. You're going to need to reapply the dimensions and the parameters, but it's not like you're starting completely from scratch.
I also believe you can group it, right? Can't you group it and export the group? I don't know exactly what happens to it after the fact, but I do know that it
becomes an RFA. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you got to group it while you're in family editor mode. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the key.
You select here, you group it, and then you can. So I'll just call it group 1, and then you do a save, or is it export or save as? It's save as. Yeah, save as group. But interestingly, when I do that, it actually creates an RFA. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a loadable family. Yep. Which is kind of interesting.
That was actually, I brought that up because somebody actually asked that question as you were going along. They asked if you wanted to take an in-place family and make a family out of it. So you just answered them 2 ways. You have the copy-paste into an RFA, or you have the group it and then export. Or I think you can also just right-click on the browser somewhere. I haven't done it in a while. But
no, if you right-click the browser, it's a different command.
Okay.
So that's actually going to export every family. Like when you do the save.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's going to actually export all the families to RFAs, but it won't do the in-place ones. Awesome. So the in-place one, the only way I know of, and again, if somebody's found another way, I'd love to know. But
it looks like a lot of people use the group method, maybe because you have the group there. I'm not sure. I guess it doesn't really make a huge difference, but
it saves a step, I guess. Yeah. You don't have to create the family, and then the advantage of creating the family first is if you've got your own template, or if you want the structure that would normally be in the template, when you do the group method, you get nothing. Like it doesn't have any anything that was except what was already in the family. So if you think about like casework always starts with a few reference planes and a few dimensions and stuff like that. You'll get the parameters that casework needs, but they won't be assigned to anything in the family already. You know, so if there's little things in the family template that you want, then starting with the template first and then pasting in can be a little bit better. But it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's negligible, the difference, you know. So.
Yep. No, that's great. Someone asked a question before we move on.
Yep.
I forgot to ask it. I'm trying to find it in the chat now, so I'm sorry if I forgot who asked it. But they asked about the view cube, and it sounded like resetting or assigning to different true north. I don't know exactly what they're saying, but I think what they're to lead the witness a little for you. I think what they're talking about is, you know, when you're using the view cube, if you want to reorient what top and left and right is, so that sort of thing. So maybe quickly before we jump out, maybe giving a sense of what that means.
Right, like let's say I wanted this to be the front view.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a little home button here, and when I click that, it's going to go back to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So if I kind of spin this around and I like this direction, first of all, there's two things that you want to know here. One is save view, but that's going to force me to rename it because the view right now is that curly bracket 3D, and you know that's a built-in name. You can't reuse that name. So I'll just accept the default 3D Ortho 1. But then you can right click here and you can say set current view as home. And I think that's what they're probably asking about. So now if I, you know, spin this around like this, and then I click the home button, it's going to go back to here. So that can be really helpful if you know, this is what I want my home view to be. And each 3D view can have their own home view. And that's an easy way to get back to it. So
awesome. I was just going to say that's
not
exactly
what they're asking, then
right. If that's not what you meant, shoot it in the chat. So I'm sorry, I forgot. I missed your name in the chat, and I literally can't find it as I'm rolling back. So, but thanks, Paul. That was I think that was
problem.
I think that was generally what they were asking. A few people also chime in about the saving out, and it looks like a lot of people do use the grouping method, and apparently you could also right click the group name in the browser and save the same way you save the RFA from the group. I think.
Oh yeah, okay. I think you have to stay in model edit mode though.
Okay.
Because as soon as you jump out of edit, so the key is you have to stay in model edit mode no matter which method you use. Because if you jump out, that group kind of gets absorbed into the in place family, and you won't have access to it. So the only time you have access to it is when you're in model edit mode. But yeah, that should work. You're absolutely. All right. So again, I'm going to continue my theme of highlighting things that. So anytime Desi would write, "Arg, are you kidding me? You're killing me here." I made note of that, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna use that as a feature later on. So it was funny because my defense turned out to be really weak on this one. Because, and I think I know what was, you know, I tend to write these books in order because you're building a model. So, you know, it doesn't make sense to jump around because then you're going to constantly have to go back and rework things, right? So I try to write them in the order. So at this early stage, I think I was thinking, well, this is a good way to show wall edit in place. You know, that can be a useful tool. And so anyway, this was with foundations. And so if I just go to the basement view, ostensibly, this lesson is about adding strip footings to walls, which is super easy to do. You go to structure, and under the footing here, you pick wall footing, and you literally just click a wall, and it will add a footing to the bottom of that wall. Now, that's how easy it is, except that we run into the first snag, the little, you know, yellow tinted warning that pops up over here with the ding. None of the elements are visible in the view. Right. So that's the first thing that I talk about is how to deal with that. So I'm going to cancel out of here, click anywhere to dismiss that. And if I just sort of go to 3D view, let's hide this topography, both of these things, I guess. You know, it is there. So there's the footing. It came in. It's just that it's below the view range, right? And view range is always one of those things that kind of trips people up a little bit. And I think the main reason is so many other things in Revit are graphical, and the view range dialog requires you to work with these numbers in a kind of crappy dialogue, right? So I'm going to do the keyboard shortcut, which is VR, but you can also get to it on the properties palette. And there is a little show button here where you can get a diagram, which does help.
That is an extremely helpful thing that they added at some point in time, because explaining this to people without a graphic like this was an extremely challenging thing.
You're struggling. You're like, okay, so imagine this. But for anybody who took a drafting class, nothing in here is terribly complex. It's the same stuff we learned in drafting class. At some point, we're cutting through the model, and then we're looking down, and we're seeing what the model would look like, abstracted, of course, in a floor plan rendition. And the reason that I'm not seeing the footing here under this wall is just simply because this number 3 here, which is the bottom of the view range, is at 0, and that's the very top edge of the footing. So the entire footing occurs below that, right? So if I just put a negative number in here, but not so fast, it will complain because there's actually 2 bottoms, right? And this is a little out of the scope of what I want to talk about here. View depth. If somebody really wants me to go into it, I will, but I'll for now, I'm just going to say, for now, let's just make them both the same. Okay. And then, but this yellow zone could be different. Let's just leave it at that. And that is actually one way you could deal with footings if you wanted to. So we'll see what the questions come up if anybody wants me to dig into that. But anyway, when I do that and I click apply, then the footing shows up. So at least we're getting somewhere now, right? So that deals with the first warning. But now, of course, it doesn't look anything like what we'd want a footing to look like. We'd want it to have a dashed edge. We probably don't want to see that hatch pattern, right? Well, both of those things can take place in visibility graphics. Now, I'll do the keyboard shortcut VG, but it is on the view tab for those people who prefer buttons. And if I go down and I find the structural foundations category, then we just change the line type to some sort of a dashed line. So I'll just choose dash here, and then I will override the fill patterns. And a lot of people think you want to turn this off to hide the fill patterns. You do that, the whole footing disappears. What you want to do is turn off the visibility of the pattern only. So that's why it's important that you're in the pattern column here. You click override, and there are actually 2 patterns. Now, in this case, I don't know which one the footing is using. I think it's using the foreground only, but just to play it safe, I'm going to uncheck both. And I'll click OK. And then when I click OK again, that looks a little bit more like what I would want a footing to look like in a floor plan. Now, it is possible to do something very similar using view range pretty much exclusively. I think you still have to hide the fill pattern either way, which is why I tend to favor this approach. But it is possible to get the dashed line anyway using view depth. So again, I'll see what the questions come up. But
well, somebody, Carly said, get into it, view depth.
Get into it. All right.
And then 2 other people were complaining about view range for RCPs can be maddening.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, this is going to
so maybe it's worth a couple minutes to go on a little rant about view ranges.
All right, so let's do this. Let me finish the edit profile thing that I was going to show, and then we'll jump into view range a little bit here. So 2 approaches to, so let's put a footing underneath this wall too, right? And there's really 2 approaches to, this section here needs to be a little bit lower. I did it in the book with edit profile, and Des was just begging me to do it with just splitting the wall. And, both are, did I go to the right view? Yeah, east. No, that doesn't, I thought it was east, but maybe it's west. Well, we'll find out in a minute. Yeah, I think that's right. Nope, it is not right. I guess it is west. I don't know the directions of my own file here. There we go. Okay. So, one way is to select this wall. You do edit profile, and I'm just going to eyeball this. In the book, it's obviously done more precisely. Then it's just some trims and extends. And, there are plenty of times when this is appropriate. And so when I started to say, and the cool thing about that is, right, is the step footing responds to that. So there was really just 2 things I was trying to show here in this lesson. One was that the footing responds to edit profile, which I thought was kind of cool. And the other is, at this early stage of writing, I wasn't sure that I was going to show edit profile at some other point in the book. Well, it turns out I actually do show it later in the book. And so I probably could have taken Desi's advice and done it this way, which is to just go to the basement view, which I already have open here, split the wall. So you could click the tool or do SL, and then select this wall and just drop the base offset. Because I eyeballed the other one, I'm just going to take a guess here, but I'm going to do -2 on that, and then let's see what happens there. So we're close, but not quite, right? Like if you get those to line up, that would be nicer, but that works too. Now, potentially, though, the only disadvantage is that you do have two separate walls here where this is still one continuous wall. So it really just depends what you're going to do further down the road in your project. I don't know that necessarily one of these approaches is inherently superior to the other. But there are definitely times, I mean, I've certainly used both, and there are definitely times when the specifics of a project might lead you towards one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I wonder if what I haven't really looked into it, just my thinking out loud, the analytical model, if you are structurally, if you're actually using it, the splitting versus editing profiles to have an effect on the analytical model, if you're into that part of Revit, maybe. I'm just thinking because you said Daisy, so I'm wondering if structural wise, that's why.
Yeah, I could not answer that question. That's a great question, and since Desi is structural, maybe that's why she was objecting.
That was my thought. Is maybe she's like, no, because it screws with everything else. I don't know.
I'll have to dig into it with her. I'll ask her. But I'm not familiar with the analytical model other than knowing that it's there. So I'm very much architectural. All right. So I just did a copy of the view. Let's get back to the view range thing here. So by the way, I did the keyboard shortcut earlier, VR, but if you want to get it on the properties palette, you just scroll down, view range, click this little edit button, gets you to the same place. So conceptually, the idea is this yellow zone, in order to quote unquote, enable that. I don't know if you guys can see me doing air quotes, but
yep, I can see you. I hope they can, but I think I can.
Yeah. to enable that, these two numbers have to be different. Okay. But the reason it complained when I tried to do this is simply because these numbers can't get out of order. And that's where the frustration comes in with the reflected ceiling plan. So hold that thought for a second. Okay. So imagine that these guys are in lines for concert tickets, right? And this is, the guy that pulled position number 1. This is position 2, 3, and 4. And they can't change positions in line. Okay. So if you set the numbers such that one of them tries to cut ahead in line, that's when you get that error message. Okay. So that's really what's going on there. They can be the same, obviously, right? So 0 and 0 is fine. This could be 4. This could be 4. But they couldn't be, this couldn't be 3. Okay. You'll get the same error. All right. So that's the first thing. If you don't care about view depth, then just set both of these the same. -2 is what I did a moment ago. But if you do want view depth, then leave the bottom where it is. And so that leaves number 3 right where it is. And then to get this yellow zone, we would just drop this to -2. Now, the only thing that happens when I apply that is I do see the foundations appear, but it's not very satisfying because, as you can see, they're showing as solid lines. Now, the pattern isn't there, but don't assume that means I was wrong earlier. Remember, I duplicated this view. So if we go back to VG, notice that both of the overrides are still applied here. So the reason we're not seeing the patterns is that they are still hidden. So you do have to do that step regardless. Okay. But why is it ignoring the fact that I put a dashed line here? Well, the reason is quite simple. The whole concept of view depth is this yellow zone automatically applies an override of its own, and that one takes precedence over any other line style override. So we've got a double override here. This view is saying override structural foundations to use a dashed line, but it's also saying to have a view depth. Now, let me just do a quick wall over here. Let's take that wall. Let's raise the bottom of it to 2 feet. So it's still being cut, but now it's raised up. Here, make that a little cleaner so you can see. Here's the section, right? Whoops. Oh, no. Yeah, relative to basement. There we go. So it's raised up 2 feet, right? But it's still cutting through where it should cut through. If I put a footing underneath that, structure and footing, you see how that one is using the settings that we previously designated? So the plot thickens, right? Let me just pause for a minute and think if anybody can think of why, based on what I've already told you. And I'll bring the hint up. I'll open view range again, right? There's actually a couple things going on here. Jeff, do we have any takers?
Not yet.
No? All right. So
they might be behind a little bit.
Yeah, they might be saying, "Oh, you just made my head hurt." Right? Yeah. This is not Essentials anymore. We're kind of But I told you I was perfectly fine to dive into the rabbit hole. So here we are. All right. So remember that the yellow zone only occurs between 3 and 4. Okay. Which this is 3 and this is 4. Okay. And so we're at 0 to -2. And that covers all these other
Hold
footing.
on, we have an answer. They must have caught up. Let me see. Oh,
Okay.
now they're live. Looks like BIM Bums said, check the line style beyond.
Mm-hmm.
They're leading the witness there.
They know the answer.
They know the answer before.
They just gave away the punchline. But that's exactly right. See, what the yellow zone means is any object in that yellow zone is going to use a special line type called beyond. And so we can see that if we go to, we have 2 ways to deal with that, because of course, why would you just want to do one? So the one way is to do it globally for your entire project. So you can go to manage, additional settings and line styles, and then expand your line styles. And when I change the resolution of my screen, it always squishes everything there. So my apologies. But this is the beyond line style. And anywhere in the project where you enable that view range, that view depth area, that yellow zone, it will now override with this beyond line style, which at the moment for me is just pen weight 1 with a solid line pattern, which is why it's not very satisfying to look at. So if I just change this line pattern to, let me do just a different one. Let's do like dash dot. Okay. And I'll click apply. You could see how that is rendering differently now. In fact, just for the fun of it, we can make it a different color. Right? I don't know if that red will show up or not. Sort of. Let's make it really fat. Okay. So anything you do here to the beyond line style is going to apply to any object that falls in that range. Now, I said any object on purpose. So let's take this wall. Let me copy it right here. I don't need the footing for this necessarily, but let's take this and we'll set the bottom to -1. And the top, we'll make it unconnected. And we'll just make it 2 feet tall. And did I get it in that zone? No, it's probably still too tall, right? Oh yeah, because I got to do all negative. All right, so let's do unconnected height of, let's do 10 inches. That should get it there. So now it's below the basement level, which is where the view depth starts. And now you see how it's rendering the same way. So that's not category based. That's any geometry that falls in that zone. So you could imagine that if the only thing you had in that zone was footings, then that could be an effective way to deal with the problem of getting your footings to show dashed. The reason I tend to favor the view range a little bit more is, first, 2 reasons. One is I can focus it just on footings, which I think is valuable. And 2, it's a lot more discoverable for everybody on the team, because even though I just explained it to you and you're probably saying, oh, okay, that sort of makes sense, it's still kind of out there, right, in terms of complexity. And you could imagine where you could get confused by that. And there's probably people on your team that would have no idea. I want to change this weird line style that they use, and I have no idea how to do it. And they're in VG and they're changing things and they're getting frustrated, right? So I like the concept of a beyond line style. I like the concept of a view depth, but I think it is just a little too out there. It's a little too on the fringe, and it's a little too inflexible to be super practical most of the time. Okay. I don't know. Is there anything else that you want to know about view depth?
No, that was awesome. That was great. The question no one asked, but I think maybe someone would want to ask if they're looking at this in the future, is if you're utilizing that beyond, instead of using object styles, is there another route to take if you want to do it per view, right?
Yeah, exactly. So instead of changing it in the line styles directly, you can do it there's another little gotcha here, because a lot of people don't realize that the lines category is in VG, right? But there's lines category, and then here's beyond, and then we could override it here. So now it would only apply to this floor plan, nowhere else. So we could have different settings for a roof plan that uses beyond, and different settings for a ceiling plan that uses beyond, and other settings for a foundation plan. So I think if you're going to use beyond, this is probably the better way to do it. Because because it's all in VG, and then you can save it in view templates. So it's probably a little nicer.
Especially if you're gonna be if you're gonna be doing line work overrides like that. I would say
Yeah.
for me personally, my beyond by default might be like a halftone or a gray, just so that visually I can see
No.
it by
Yeah.
default, and then if I want to do it by view, by view. So then I guess
I agree.
to follow up on a couple other comments, then and maybe just for the sake of tying up what you just said, if you jumped into like a ceiling plan and you flip open the view range,
Yeah.
maybe just graphically show how that pretty much just applies in the
Does
ceiling
Jitsi
plane.
have an on-screen pen tool?
I don't know actually. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
you may have to
I might have to
use.
fake it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is one of those things that I really just have a hard time being an apologist for Revit on, because this is just lazy programming, if you ask. They decided, oh, well, it's the same dialogue, and they even left all the same terminology, but it's really not, because you have to imagine taking this area here. I'm going to do a screen capture, and I'll annotate it in Snagit. Okay. So you have to imagine taking this area here, right? So let me just write this, and it actually goes up here. Okay. So the view depth is not really depth at all. It's kind of like above the top. And then the other thing that doesn't apply is bottom, which they sort of implied there because it's grayed out. Okay. But there's no bottom, and view depth is really above. And so right there, that just means that trying to use this dialogue to understand what the heck is going on is really super frustrating. And then when you start typing numbers in here, Revit knows that. So now that whole thing they can't get out of order, you have to remember the view depth is the tallest in a ceiling plan. It's not the lowest. I mean, come on. Would it have been that hard to just make another dialogue? I mean, really?
I was kind of leading you on that one because I've been there, and it frustrates me that at a minimum they didn't just change that graphic that explains it on the left, because that alone would have probably changed.
I mean, that's something,
approach to it.
Right? But that's something. But I mean, come on, how hard is it to just make another dialogue, right? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a programmer, so maybe it's really hard, but whatever. Okay, I'm going to close this one. How are we doing on time, Jeff?
I mean, we're pretty much hitting the limit here. I'm checking just to make sure we're not missing anybody out.
All right. Well,
a lot of people are really into view ranges, so maybe it's worth doing a whole nother thing one day about view ranges.
View range. All right. There's two things in particular I'd like to squeak in if we can.
Yeah,
One,
let's do it.
My favorite things that is really underutilized. Groups get a bad rap. Okay, I'm sorry, but I love groups, and I think it's not that hard to use them properly. And again, maybe we'll do a whole session one day on groups if people want that. But I just want to show you my favorite feature of groups. So I'm going to select all of this geometry here, and I'm going to group it. Well, it's kind of two favorite features built into one. So the first thing is it's complaining about the section and the elevations. I'll just click OK, because those can't be in a group. And I'll just call this guest room, and then tab over to here, and this one's going to be called tags, because this is my first favorite feature of groups is attached detail groups. So there's really two groups here, and so if I were to copy, let me copy both of these next to each other like that, right? Look how cool that is, right? There's the door numbers here, 1, 2, and 3, and they automatically sequence here, but it's still part of a group. Okay. And I don't know. I just think that's these needs. I just think that's the coolest thing. The fact that they thought of that and they made that work that way. So an attached detail group allows you to have all the annotation that's associated with the underlying model, and it just takes care of itself. It works the way you would expect. But my real favorite feature is the exclude option. So I'm going to mirror this thing on top of itself here. And of course, you're going to get the double geometry warning there. And then it looks really bad, right? So the solution is real easy. You highlight it, you tab, it highlights the other one. You tab again, and now it highlights the wall. You click on that wall, and this little magic icon appears here, or you could just press the delete key, believe it or not. And what you're doing is removing that group member from one instance of the group. Now, which one? I don't know, whichever one you had selected when you tabbed, right? So if I pull these apart, do you see how this one is missing a wall and this one has the wall? So they are currently sharing this wall, And that means that all of your counts are correct. Like if you did a schedule, graphically, you don't have those weird geometry cleanup things going on. And I have seen people go to crazy extensive lengths building custom families or doing all kinds of crazy visibility graphic stuff to get close to, but not even come in range of what that just does naturally. So if people just understood the way groups behave on their own normally and naturally, I think a lot of the headaches that people complain about would just go away. It's not hard to do. It's like so easy and immediate. So if you're one of those people that's kind of given up on groups, I would ask you to revisit it. And there's an entire chapter on groups in the book. So that might be a reason for you to get it right there. And of course, we can do a session on that in the future. If
does
there's
does that just a quick follow up? Does that make a new group for that original one or no? A new
Nope.
group type?
This is a group with an override applied to it. When you select one, like this one, is the one that doesn't have the override. When so watch, look at the ribbon here, right? And when I click this one, a new button, right? Yep. So you can always bring that excluded member back again. You need to, and you can also do it by just tabbing. It's still there, right? Ghost it in. I can tab in and I can bring it back again manually too, right? So I mean, it's super cool, and it's like it's exactly what's needed if you're doing any kind of apartment layouts, dormitories, hotel rooms. It's exactly what you want. Okay. So anyway, I've always been a huge fan of this feature of groups, but I like groups in general. People overuse groups for things that they shouldn't, that they should be using families for. And then they use families for things they should be using groups for. I think you really want to understand both of them really well. And then it becomes obvious when you should use a group versus a family. And again, Jeff, we can do a session in the future if folks want that.
I'm fascinated to see view ranges and groups are striking a chord, which is really funny because I don't know. It's just not one of those things that I would think of, but clearly there's a lot of people.
It's funny you say that. Back when I used to maintain my own YouTube channel, my view range video by far had the most views.
Well, maybe we need to revisit that then. Let's maybe we'll do a whole session on view ranges and groups.
Yeah, I mean, they don't exactly go together, but what the hell?
Why not?
Yeah. All right, and then last thing I wanted to just talk about, and maybe I can do this in the PDF, is just to introduce each section, I did a graphic, and there's no way to get that toolbar to go away, huh? I guess not. Well, anyway, I just wanted to just point out some of my when you're trying to make, and Jeff, I know this is near and dear to your heart because you're always doing presentation stuff directly in Revit. So I just wanted to kind of point out a few of the things that I did in each of these views to kind of just make the view a little bit more interesting than what you get by default. So I think it's pretty obvious what this one is using. It's a hidden line. Turn on the background, please. Right? You can change those colors. Okay, so when you're in a view in Revit, right? If you turn on graphic display options, right down here, background, you turn on gradient, you've got control over all three colors. So the default looks like that. And, it's fine. And in a lot of cases, that will give you, like, if you're looking more at the sky versus at the ground. But you can change all three of those colors if you don't like them. So, here you can see that I just tinted it a little bit to the yellow side, kind of tannish yellow, right? So if you want to change the tint of that color, easy to do. And then obviously this has got sketchy lines, which is not always super successful. But I thought, what the hell, I'll do at least one view that way, right? So they are sketchy lines. This one is my new favorite go-to kind of quick presentation mode. And I learned this from a client of mine. It never occurred to me to use consistent colors for anything. Okay. This is consistent colors, but what makes it useful or makes it interesting is when you couple it with ambient shadows, which I've always been a huge fan of. So I would always do hidden line with ambient shadows, right? So if I go into here and turn on shadows, ambient shadows, click OK. This isn't the world's greatest model to show this in, right? But it just kind of dirties everything up and kind of gets a little pooling in the corners. And I've always loved the ambient shadows. Well, with consistent colors, now you get a little pop of color, but it's not overwhelming. Like if you ever turned on ambient shadows with regular shading, it's almost always too dark, right? Because it shades some of the walls really dark, and then on top of that, it adds the ambient effect. But when you do it with consistent colors, you see how bright this is, but it still has a little bit more interest. It's just not as, literally, that's the only thing going on in this view, other than being one of those dramatic perspectives, right? But it's just consistent colors and ambient shadows. Done.
Awesome.
Right?
That's
Straight out
great.
of Revit.
I've never in my entire life used consistent colors for anything, so you
So
just
there you
gave me
go.
a reason to try it out.
Give it a try. Now, this one is visibility graphics. Okay. So this is another technique that I've really been using a lot where you just want some part of the model to pop. You just select those objects and you go into visibility graphics and you override the surface pattern to solid fill and give it a color. And then if you make it halftone, it becomes even less intense. And you get this really interesting. So like here, this is the new edition and this is the existing construction. It's really pretty obvious that that's what's going on. And I didn't even bother doing all the doors and windows because I didn't think it was necessary. I thought if you just do the overall geometry with just that little pop, then that's enough, right? And in fact, actually, I think I snuck that in here, so I lied. There was one I did that for the floor here too, right? I just like that purple color. And then it's also here. And this one, I have a video in my tip series at LinkedIn Learning about how I put this together. But this is actually three. Let me make this smaller so you can see the whole image. This is actually three views layered on top of each other directly in Revit in a sheet, not Photoshop. Okay, no Photoshop here. Okay, so this is the most dramatic perspective of the bunch. So again, I started in a plan view and I kind of tilted it and then I turned on perspective and I fiddled around and rewind and it took a while to get just the view I wanted. Once you get the view, don't mess with it because you're going to make 3 copies of it. So I made 3 copies of that view. And then what a lot of folks don't realize is if you've got the section box turned on here. So if I scroll down and I turn on the section box, right? Let's just kind of cut through there. Okay, so there's the section box. So that's how you're getting that cutaway 3D plan. Well, if you, let's just duplicate this. Or let me just actually go to another view. So I'm going to select that and then go to a north view. Okay. Do you see how it's still selected? This is where you can control where it cuts super precisely. You can't quite snap, but you can zoom in really close and get it almost to snap. And that's how I got these columns are actually starting right where the other section box ends. But because it was a duplicate of the same perspective, you're getting the same angle. And that's the key because otherwise it won't line up and look natural, right? So you just crop out the whole 3rd floor there and then extend it up to go into the 4th floor. And all I'm showing is those columns kind of projecting unnaturally into space there. And I turned on sketchy lines just to make them a little more ethereal, right? And I even made them semi-transparent, right? I'm just playing with settings. And I did the same thing. I don't know if you can really see the stair down there, but the stair is kind of doing the same thing, So I have a separate view for the stair, a separate one for the columns and a separate one for the overall geometry. And you just make sure that you don't mess with the perspective once you get it perfect, because otherwise it blows the whole illusion, Awesome. But you just put them on a sheet and they snap to one another. So I don't know if folks realize that, but like if I duplicate this 3D view and I'll just leave it copy 1 and then I'll just make a sheet and I'll just drag in the first one. Right now, these are the same, right? I didn't change anything about them, but you see how I'm dragging it in and look at that. See how it wants to, perfect. 2 views right on top of each other. Well, of course, they're showing the same thing. So one's completely covering up the other, but imagine that the one on top is only showing columns. Mm-hmm. Well, now those columns are covering up anything under the columns, but they're letting everything else show through. So you're literally, it's real important that you drag them in the correct order.
I was just gonna say you can't control so you have to mess around with what order you're putting them in. But usually it's usually layered on top the order you place them, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly. You do the 3rd floor first, then the columns, the stairs, right? And it's pretty easy to do. Now, if you like Photoshop, I'm not against Photoshop. I have Photoshop. I use it. But I always like to show people that sometimes you can do everything right in Revit. And that's a view. It's a sheet. And it will print with your set. Mm-hmm. You don't have to export it as a JPEG and then bring it back in. So, of course, if somebody changes the perspective, it's going to mess up the whole thing. But there is that lock feature. I don't know if folks know about that. But you can do – this is a little fail-safe. So I can say save the orientation and lock the view. I got to give this a different name now. So I'll just call it – whatever. Mm-hmm. And then now you see how I can't orbit. Mm-hmm. I can't pan. I can't I can pan, but I can't like change the view, right? So now it's kind of locked. So that'll help preserve that. So that's a little fail safe. Of course, anybody can unlock the view, so it's not like it's permanent. But
Awesome.
what you're trying to do is just prevent people from doing things accidentally.
Yeah, for sure.
So
A little trick too is I do these a lot. When it comes to lining up the section boxes, as you mentioned, you can't snap them. But if you have one like you mentioned where you want, maybe you want to make a view that's the top of this floor, right where you're cutting, you want it to continue from there up.
yeah,
If you actually pull the bottom of this section box all the way up, so it basically closes on itself, you'll see it makes a flat section box and just let go.
yeah,
And now if you grab it and you pull up, it actually lets you continue from the original spot.
nice.
And I only know that because I've done a lot of these views, and it's just one of those things where if you just flatten and squish the section box, they overlap, but then you can continue going up. So
Oh, see, I just
kind of a
learned
cool
something.
trick there, yeah.
Yeah, I just learned something. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really
And you
neat.
could do that in your section view. It doesn't matter what view you're doing it in, but if you close the section box, it like becomes this weird plane thing that you can pull up or down from that location.
That is very cool. Well, I'll definitely. That's a little easier. I'll definitely use that next
Well,
time.
yeah, because I've been there. I know you're probably zooming in and trying to line that perfectly.
Oh
So that's
God, yeah.
good.
And you're trying to get it just right, and if it overlaps a little, it's fine because
Yeah,
nobody will
yeah,
see it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Great, man.
yeah. Anyway, I mean, yeah, we are definitely at time now. So, are there any other questions?
No, it looks like everyone's pumped. If you want to stop sharing your screen now, we can see both of our faces,
All
so
right.
everyone remembers who they're talking to here.
Let's see. And then, do I have
Perfect.
to tell my camera to come back on again or no?
Nope, I see you. Perfect.
Okay, cool.
No, it looks like everyone's pumped. Everyone was really into the group stuff and the view range. It's funny, you talked about grouped and in place massing. You're like the BIM manager's worst
I know.
nightmare right now.
I know they're all like hating me. They're like,
I just watched Paul up and he said use groups and in place components.
yeah. In fact, he said put groups in place masses.
Oh man, so awesome.
I always get misquoted. It's so funny. I'll have people come up to me. Well, we don't do conferences anymore, but when we did conferences, they'll come running up to me and they'll say, I was at this meeting and I was like, but Paul Aubin said, and then they'll, they mean well, and I'm like, then I have to gently correct them. I'm like, well, I didn't exactly say that. I said the first half, but then really what you missed the second part where I said, but so I always try and make the disclaimers,
Yeah.
My attitude is we wouldn't have a tool if it was completely useless. Right. So if people use the tools, if they understand the pros and the cons and the, what shouldn't be done and where it can be problematic, blah, blah, blah. And then they still make, the decision because it's the best for their project or what they're trying to achieve, then they have my blessing. I just really get annoyed when people just look for the shortcut and they don't bother to learn what the potential downside is and how many other people in the team they're going to affect, because that's really the problem with things like groups used improperly or in-place families used improperly. It's just hell for everybody else in the project team. And that's why most BIM managers are against them. But, if they were being honest and if you got them privately over a beer and you asked them, well, what about trying to do this, or this other thing that you can't easily do any other way? They would all agree. Oh, yeah, but, my team, I've got 300 users and I have to, and I get that. So I'm not telling you to go against your BIM manager and don't do something that they told you not to do. I'm absolutely not saying that. But,
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's
my job is to educate. So
yeah, and understanding why, and that's the thing. I think it's easy if you're in charge of those things to draw a black and white line immediately because that's it can't be.
Right.
But understanding why and that there are valuable uses to those tools, I think is cool. Paul,
yeah,
man,
and in
awesome.
fact, I had a tip. I had a bullet point on my PowerPoint that I was looking at over here that I forgot to mention. But when we were trying to define what exactly Essentials is, that was actually one of my points. What Essentials is depends completely on your audience. So the Essentials for your firm could be very different than the Essentials just for somebody generally using Revit, because if you do a very specific kind of work that has these needs and these stakeholders and they expect things a certain way, it's very different. So certainly if anybody starts quoting me and saying that was their reason to revolt against their BIM manager, you misquoted me. It is not what I'm saying. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul. This is great. A couple questions actually on how to get your books. So maybe we'll finish off with where people can find you, whether it's Twitter or your website. And I'll also, as with every episode, I'll have notes. I'll have links in the bottom of the description here on YouTube and on therevitKid.com tomorrow. So I'll definitely put any links to Paul's books and his information. But Paul, where can people find you the best?
My website is myfullname.com. So paulaubin.com, and I'm going to try and share it. I don't know if that came across.
It's trying to. There it goes. Yep.
All right. And then books is here at the top. And of course, the very first one is the new one, Revit Essentials for Architecture.
There we go.
It is available in paperback and Kindle. So in Kindle, even if you don't have a physical Kindle device, it's actually better if you don't, because it there's viewers,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for iPad, for your computer, or whatever. And the nice thing about the Kindle edition is you get the color.
Mm.
The book is in black and white. So I tried really hard to boost the contrast of all the images to make them as legible as possible. But, if you really want to see the images, in their full glory, then the Kindle might be the way to go because they're in full color. So,
Awesome.
Jeff, what do you think? I was thinking maybe the person that asked about, go ahead, dive into the view depth rabbit hole.
I was literally thinking the exact same thing. Here, if you
All
want to
right.
stop sharing your screen so we can wrap up.
Yeah. So then we'll say that person is our.
Yeah, so I think her name was Carly, I believe, and I don't know if she's on anymore, but maybe she'll see it in the future. So hopefully she sees it and she shoots me an email. So Carly, thanks for the view range, starting us down the rabbit hole, and shoot me an email at jeff@therevitkid.com, and I'll hook you up with Paul, and you can get a free copy of the book. So,
But I'm going to do you one better, Jeff.
right.
We're going to take everybody who signed up, and we're going to throw them into a random pool, and then we're going to do a second copy just randomly from everyone. So everybody, you've got your sign up list. So that's it's closed now. So you don't. If you're watching this in the future, sorry, it's too late.
Sorry.
But we're going to do it from the closed list that you have, and we'll do another person. And you can choose paperback or Kindle. I can actually gift you a coupon on Amazon to download the Kindle if you prefer.
So cool, man. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thanks for coming on, as usual.
I loved it. It was great fun. I always enjoy spending time with the Revit Kid. So until next time.
Awesome. And everyone who's here, thank you so much for joining us. If you're seeing us in the future, thanks for joining us then. This is BIM After Dark Live. You can check out all the episodes at live.bimafterdark.com. You can check me out at therevitkid.com or at the Revit Kid on Twitter. And I hope to see everyone next week. So, Paul, again, thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to say, have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. See ya.